There's a lot of opportunities to create problems in single footlock from the floor. Students will do all kinds of things that make for not a great footlock or just simply the wrong wrap. So let's take a look at some of these common mistakes and how to cue the correct way to do it. We'll also talk about considerations for making the footlocks comfortable and just technically really good. So first thing is, my fabric's kind of coiled, and it's not actually coiled at the place where I would be really mainly wrapping the footlock, but if it is, that's the first thing you can advise your student to do, is to uncoil it, because that coil is not going to sit well against the body, and it's going to create a little more of that feeling of like acute pressure. So pretty much every student ever does this thing where they want to go the backwards way. I try to use the cue round the outside to cue this, but outside, inside are weird terms to aerialists and are not interpreted the same way by everyone. So you could also think of cueing them as start with the tail between your legs. I don't typically use that one because I don't want them to think they need to put it back, but you could also say place the tail so it's draping to the inner thigh. A couple of different options there. Definitely not all the options, but just a few to start with. The next thing before any wrapping starts happening, to get in place is the hands. We don't want to be using just one hand. We want to have the same side hand as you're wrapping up as high as it can go. This is going to create stability in the fabric. And then we want the bottom hand to be about belly button height to start. Okay, so now your student is prepped. The next thing is that students will often just start wrapping with their foot close to the ground, and then they'll end up too close to the ground once the footlock is on. So I recommend cueing students to lift the knee as high as they can to start and to wrap a circle. And then, I don't know, they always go for this. They always try to grab for the tail immediately. They just go for this is it, right? This is what I'm doing. So I like to have them say, just keep your bottom hand where it is. And then once you've got your wrap around your foot, you're going to slide the hand down to kind of mid-calf. You're going to pull in slack. Students will often get the wrap backwards. So they have a good basic wrap. They pull it in, and then they go under the foot, under the toes, to the wrong side of the foot. So two things here. One is I use the phrase, once they're here, over the top to step on. That usually works. So over the top of the foot to step on. Toward the pinky doesn't always work because they can think of this as toward the pinky too, if that makes sense. The other thing is to teach them, once they are in a footlock, look where your pole is, and teach them that they will always see that the pole is flowing from the inner foot. That's how they can look at it and have that visual knowledge, I see that it is correct because the inner edge of the foot is where I should see the pole. That is a good thing to include in the first lesson. I would say you don't have to wait. Save that for later. I think that's a really helpful cue for people. Okay, so I say maybe pull toward opposite armpit. You can say pull toward your ribs. But here's what usually happens next. If you say, now wrapped over the top of your foot toward your pinky toe, and they listen correctly, they will do this. Okay, I'm going to try to show you what's happening. And you get this crazy bubble. It's not taut. So what happened? We allowed slack to come into the system. This can be confusing to explain, but completely worth it, and maybe best to show them first. So we get all of that set up, good to go. And then I think about pulling elbow wide. Okay, so I'm going to pull my elbow out, and I'm going to keep that fabric taut around to the back of my leg, and then step in. I kind of call this the chicken wing method because, I don't know, my elbow kind of feels like chicken status. You don't have to use that cue, but that's something that I'll say. But that makes a really big difference, and it requires this kind of internal rotation of the shoulder too, because you're making this circle and the shoulder rolls in. You don't have to say that to your student, but that can help you understand it. Okay, even if that goes pretty well, sometimes the footlock will be a little bulky, so you can let your student know that the fabric should be around to the back of their ankle, so if they need to pull it up a little, go ahead and pull it up. And you can also pull a little bit on the tail to make things more snug. Obviously, doing all of that manually is not ideal, but for the sake of getting the footlock comfortable and secure, you can do it as you're getting started. Okay, next detail. I like to offer a bit of a wiggle. So if you point your foot down a few times, it will help scooch the wrap toward the back of your foot, which is a more stable and comfortable placement. And then you want to just check in, what is their foot position? This can actually be a problem earlier in the sequence, so like when they're first holding their foot. I'll show that in a second. But we really want to make sure that they are stepping in on the inner edge of the foot, like they're trying to press down on the pole a little bit. If they end up here, with their foot tilted and externally rotating in the hip, this can be incredibly painful and it's not stable. And I remember doing that in the early days of my silks journey, and that pain, it wasn't severe, but it was like long lasting, like it would last a couple days if I didn't have good foot placement. Okay, so you want to check in with their foot placement. They tend to understand that in my experience once you explain it. And then if they're going to stand up on the footlock, which presumably they are, I'm going to turn myself. It's really important that the pole is placed in the inner thigh. Definitely don't want it around the outside. That kind of pushes on the knee and it is not proper form at all. So make sure the fabric is on the inside. And then we also want to make sure the foot is under the knee or under the hip, somewhere in between there. If it's over here, that could be a different kind of mount. That would be like if you were intentionally doing like this kind of mount. I do this for drills in my fitness class. But if you're trying to stand up on your footlock, have it underneath the body more. So have your student reach their arms all the way overhead, slide them to chest height, and then step on the pole. They are not standing on the knee, they are not crossing the legs, they are stamping their foot on the pole next to the knee. Presumably not in socks, because that would be, it's much more slippery that way. Then I like to explain, and I always explain this beforehand and demo it. If their arms are tired, they can link their elbows around, hold onto their shoulders, and know that this is a rest pose available to them if they don't want to step down to the floor. Okay, so those are some of the main elements. Letting them know right off the bat how to take it off is really helpful. I like to emphasize, I know even though they could just push it off, that the foot, action of the foot and the hip can take the lock off. So dropping down through the heel with the toes lifted, and then it returns them to a basic wrap. So let me rewind, because I had mentioned like how they might tilt their foot before they're even getting started. So let's say they have this. They might do all kinds of crazy things. They might like hold their knee out to the side and they're like trying, and then it starts to slip off the toes because that's too much external rotation. And it might be really subtle, where they're just kind of like curling their foot. So have them straighten out the ankle and the foot so that everything's more neutral. And to pull the knee up high to help get that lock on. And do a little wiggle. Boom. Do it one more time. Showing all of the technique that I like to see in students. And so hopefully that helps troubleshoot and refine the footlocks a bit. It's honestly like, it's got so many possible errors and probable errors. And we teach footlocks so early on that there isn't really any fabric intuition in the student yet. So take your time. I would not say try to get every single detail on the first one, because that's going to be super overwhelming. So focus on the most important points, or correcting what you see that's like egregiously wrong, like if they do hold their knee out to the side. I typically have students do the kind of slack thing a couple times before I explain the whole elbow movement. And again, it's all about reading the situation and observing the student, noticing like how much cueing are they ready for, and also just make sure you let them know what they did great.